The slithering revenge. James Carter had always prided himself on the quiet perfection of his suburban life. Nestled in the cul-de-sac of Willow Creek, his modest two-story home was a sanctuary of order, neatly trimmed hedges, a polished mailbox, and, most importantly, a pristine backyard pool. Every morning, he'd step outside with a cup of coffee, breathe in the crisp air, and let the golden sunlight wash over him. It was his ritual, a moment of peace before the chaos of the workday began. On March 8, 2025, though, that peace shattered in a way he never could have anticipated. The morning started like any other. The air was cool and fresh, carrying the faint scent of blooming jasmine from the neighbor's yard. Birds chirped overhead, darting between the oak trees that lined the street. James, still in his flannel pajamas and slippers, shuffled across the dew-kissed grass toward the pool. He'd spent the previous evening skimming leaves from its surface, ensuring the water sparkled under the moonlight. It was his pride and joy, a testament to his meticulous nature. But as he approached the edge, something felt off. The water didn't glisten the way it usually did. Instead, it looked murky. He squinted, rubbing sleep from his eyes, convinced it was a trick of the light. Maybe a cloud had drifted over the sun, casting a shadow. He took another step closer, and that's when he noticed it. The water wasn't still. It moved, not with the gentle ripples of a breeze, but with a strange, slithering motion that made his stomach lurch. "What the hell?" he muttered, leaning forward. That's when he saw them. Dozens, no, hundreds, of slimy, wriggling eels churned beneath the surface, their dark, sinewy bodies twisting and tangling in a grotesque dance. James stumbled back, nearly dropping his coffee mug. The sight was so alien, so wrong, that for a moment he couldn't process it. His pool, his beautiful, crystal-clear pool, had transformed overnight into something out of a nightmare, a writhing, living swamp. His heart pounded as he circled the deck, trying to make sense of it. The eels weren't just swimming. They were thrashing, some coiling around each other, others darting toward the edges as if seeking escape. Then, as if the scene couldn't get worse, one of the creatures lunged. With a sickening flop, it launched itself out of the water, landing on the wooden deck just inches from James's feet. Its slimy body writhed, its tiny eyes glinting in the sunlight, and James let out a strangled yell, stumbling backward onto the grass. Panic surged through him. He dropped his mug, coffee soaking into the lawn, and clutched his chest, staring at the chaotic mess before him. How had this happened? Who could have done this? His mind raced with possibilities. Vandals, a freak accident, some bizarre natural phenomenon, but none of them made sense. His property was fenced, the gate locked. There were no signs of a break-in, no footprints, no clues. Just eels. Hundreds of them, infesting his sanctuary. He took a deep breath, forcing himself to calm down. Maybe it was a prank. Kids in the neighborhood had been known to pull stupid stunts, egging houses, TPNG trees. But this was next level. He scanned the yard, half expecting to see a group of teenagers snickering behind the bushes, but there was nothing. Just the birds, the sun, and the relentless slithering in his pool. Then he heard it, a low, familiar chuckle. James's jaw clenched before he even turned around. He knew that laugh, smug, grating, dripping with self-satisfaction. Slowly, he pivoted, his eyes narrowing as they landed on the source. There, just beyond the fence, stood Lisa Grayson, his next-door neighbor. She leaned casually against the wooden slats, arms crossed, her blonde hair pulled into a messy bun. A wide grin stretched across her face, like she'd just pulled off the heist of the century. "Morning, James," she called, her voice sing-songy. "You should see your face right now. Priceless." His blood ran cold, then hot. Lisa Grayson wasn't just any neighbor. She was the neighbor. The one who treated Willow Creek like her personal playground. The one who'd borrowed his lawnmower last summer and returned it with a bent blade, claiming it was like that when I got it. The one who let her 3 feral children run wild through everyone's yards because, in her words, kids need to be free spirits. And now, apparently, the one who thought his pool needed a makeover. "What did you do, Lisa?" he demanded, his voice low and sharp. She waved a dismissive hand, still giggling. "Oh, relax, it's just a little fun. Your pool was looking so boring lately, all clean and empty. I thought I'd spice it up. James stared at her, incredulous. You dumped eels in my pool. Well, not me personally, she said, shrugging. I had a guy drop them off last night. But come on, they're harmless. Natural water cleaners, too. Plus, my kids love watching them swim. He blinked, trying to process the sheer audacity of her words. Your kids? You mean you did this so your little monsters could treat my pool like their personal zoo? Lisa smirked, tilting her head. Well, yeah. You don't mind, do you? Oh, he minded. He minded a lot. Rage bubbled up inside him, hot and unrelenting, but before he could unleash it, a familiar rumble interrupted the standoff. A beat-up red pickup truck pulled into his driveway, and out stepped Mike Torres, James's best friend since college. Mike had texted earlier about stopping by to borrow a drill, but he clearly hadn't expected to walk into this. Dude, Mike said, freezing mid-step as he caught sight of the eel-infested pool. His mouth hung open, his dark eyes wide. What in the fresh hell is going on here? James gestured wildly at Lisa, who still stood there grinning like a Cheshire cat. Lisa happened. She thought it'd be hilarious to turn my pool into a freaking swamp. Mike turned to Lisa, his expression shifting from shock to disbelief. Are you insane? She rolled her eyes, crossing her arms tighter. Oh, lighten up, you two. It's just a few eels. You're acting like I burned your house down. Mike stared at her, then back at the pool, then at her again. Lady, do you have any idea what eels do to a pool system? The filtration, the chlorine balance. It's not a damn lake. It's man-made. Lisa huffed, looking bored. Oh, please. Don't be so uptight. You guys act like I committed a crime. That's because you did. James snapped, his patience snapping like a twig. It's called trespassing and vandalism, Lisa. You're paying for the damages, and you're getting these things out of here. She laughed, a sharp, mocking sound that made his fists clench. Good luck proving it, buddy. What are you gonna do? Call the cops over a few fish? That was it. That was the moment James realized he wasn't just dealing with a nuisance. He was dealing with a whole new level of crazy. He inhaled sharply, gripping his phone. Fine. No cops. But I will be calling the HOA. Lisa smirked, unfazed. Go ahead. They won't do a thing without proof. It's your word against mine. And damn it, she was right. The Willow Creek HOA was notoriously useless, spineless bureaucrats who'd rather send passive-aggressive emails than enforce anything. Without hard evidence, they'd shrug and move on. James clenched his fists, his mind racing. If he couldn't stop her now, what would she do next? Release piranhas? Turn his garage into a petting zoo? The thought made his skin crawl. He wasn't letting this slide. An idea sparked in his mind, sharp and bright. Oh, don't worry, Lisa, he said, forcing a tight smile. You just gave me a great idea. She raised an eyebrow, intrigued despite herself. Oh yeah? What's that? He leaned in slightly, lowering his voice. Since you're so into aquatic life, I think I'll set up a little surprise of my own. For the first time, Lisa's grin faltered, just for a split second. Mike, catching on, grinned wickedly. Oh yeah? I think it's time for some payback. Lisa eyed them both suspiciously, but James played it cool. He wasn't about to tip his hand, not yet. He had work to do, and it started with getting proof. That night, as a pool service guy worked overtime to remove the eels, James installed a brand new security camera system, high-def, motion-activated, with night vision and cloud storage. If Lisa even thought about pulling another stunt, he'd have her caught in 4K. She thought she'd won. She thought he'd roll over. She had no idea what was coming. The next morning, James stood by his pool, watching the water shimmer under the rising sun. The eels were gone, hauled away in buckets by a very confused pool technician who'd muttered something about never seeing anything like this in 20 years. The water was clear again, the chlorine levels balanced, but James couldn't shake the unease gnawing at him. Lisa had gotten away with it, technically. No fines, no consequences, just that smug little wave as she'd sauntered back to her house the day before. It wasn't over. He could feel it. He sipped his coffee, replaying the confrontation in his mind. Lisa Grayson wasn't just a pest. She was a force of chaos. He'd lived next to her for 3 years, and in that time, she'd turned Willow Creek into her personal fiefdom. There was the time she'd borrowed his garden hose and returned it sliced in half because it was too long for my flower beds. The time her kids had trampled his vegetable garden, leaving muddy footprints and crushed tomatoes in their wake, while she'd shrugged and said, "They're just exploring." And the time she'd hosted a backyard barbecue so loud it rattled his windows until 2 a.m., then had the gall to complain when he'd asked her to turn it down. She was a walking entitlement complex, and now she'd set her sights on his pool. The Eels were just the latest in a long line of stunts, but they'd crossed a line. This wasn't borrowing a tool or letting her kids run wild. This was deliberate, invasive, and borderline unhinged. And the worst part? She didn't even seem to care. Mike showed up around 9, a coffee in one hand and a grin on his face. He leaned against the fence, surveying the now-empty pool. So, no more eel apocalypse overnight? Or did she come back with piranhas? James snorted, setting his mug on the patio table. Nothing yet. But I'm not convinced she's done. She got away with it too easily yesterday. You know how she is. She thrives on attention. When I didn't grovel or freak out the way she wanted, she probably started plotting something worse. Mike let out a low whistle, shaking his head. You think she's dumb enough to try again now that you've got cameras? I think you overestimate her intelligence, James said dryly. She's not exactly a master strategist. She's just Lisa. Mike laughed, but there was a glint of concern in his eyes. Man, you've got a real-life supervillain next door. What's her deal, anyway? Why's she like this? James sighed, leaning back in his chair. He'd asked himself that question 100 times. Lisa wasn't a mystery so much as a puzzle with too many missing pieces. She was in her late 30s, a single mom with 3 kids, 2 boys and a girl, all under 10, who seemed to have inherited her knack for chaos. Her husband had vanished years ago, either divorced or deployed or dead, depending on which rumor you believed. She worked part-time at a boutique downtown, but most of her energy went into tormenting the neighborhood. Some said it was boredom, others thought it was spite. James figured it was both, with a hefty dose of narcissism thrown in. She's been a nightmare since she moved in, he said. Remember the 4th of July, when she set off fireworks in her driveway at midnight? Nearly started a fire in Mrs. Henderson's rose bushes. Or when she let her dog crap in my yard for a month straight and acted like I was the jerk for bringing it up. Mike nodded, smirking. Oh yeah, classic Lisa. But Eels. That's a new low, even for her. Tell me about it, James muttered. And the worst part is, she thinks it's funny. Like I'm supposed to laugh it off and thank her for the entertainment. Mike raised an eyebrow. So what's the plan? You said something about a surprise yesterday. You weren't just bluffing, right? James grinned, a spark of mischief flickering in his chest. Oh, I've got something in mind. But first, I need proof. Those cameras are step 1. If she pulls anything else, I've got her on tape. Step 2 is making sure she regrets it. Mike clapped him on the shoulder. That's my boy. Give her a taste of her own medicine. The day passed uneventfully, but James couldn't shake the feeling that Lisa was watching. Every so often, he'd catch a glimpse of her through her kitchen window, blonde hair bobbing as she moved, probably plotting her next move. He kept busy, tweaking the camera angles, testing the motion sensors, and triple-checking the cloud storage. By nightfall, he was ready. If Lisa so much as stepped a toe onto his property, he'd know. Sure enough, 3 nights later, she struck again. It was late, past 11, when his phone buzzed on the nightstand. He'd been drifting off, half dreaming about eels slithering up his stairs, when the sharp vibration jolted him awake. His stomach flipped as he grabbed the device and saw the alert. Motion detected, backyard camera 1. Heart pounding, he pulled up the live feed. There she was, Lisa Grayson, sneaking through his yard like some kind of suburban ninja. She wore a dark hoodie and sweatpants, her hair tucked under the hood, but there was no mistaking that smug posture. In her hands, she carried a large plastic bucket, the kind you'd use for mopping floors. James hit record and zoomed in, his breath catching as she reached the pool's edge. With a quick glance around, clearly not spotting the cameras, she lifted the bucket and tipped it over. A cascade of movement spilled into the water, rippling across the surface. James squinted, trying to make out what it was, but he didn't have to wait long. The pool erupted into chaos, dozens, maybe hundreds, of frogs, frantically swimming in every direction. Their tiny bodies splashed and darted, turning the water into a writhing mass of green. His jaw clenched. She was escalating. Before he could second-guess himself, he flipped on the porch light and stormed outside. Lisa, what the hell are you doing now? She froze, the empty bucket still in her hands. For a split second, her eyes widened, but then that infuriating smirk slid back into place. Oh, hey, neighbor. Just doing you another favor. Frogs eat bugs, you know. Figured I'd help with your mosquito problem. James let out a slow, controlled breath, fighting the urge to throttle her. Get off my property. She shrugged, setting the bucket down with exaggerated care. Wow, someone's cranky. Maybe you should take a relaxing swim. Oh, wait. Never mind. She cackled, loud and obnoxious, clearly reveling in her own genius. He pointed at the cameras, his voice steady. I have everything recorded this time. You're not getting away with it. She hesitated, just for a heartbeat, before brushing it off. So what? It's just frogs. Who's gonna care? It's not like I trashed your yard or broke anything. This is trespassing. Harassment. And it's all on video, he shot back. She rolled her eyes, still unfazed. Oh, please. The HOA won't do squat. They never do. And what? You're gonna call the cops over a couple of frogs. That's when fate, or karma, stepped in. Lisa turned to leave, strutting along the wet pool deck with that same cocky swagger. But the surface was slick from the frogs splashing, and before James could blink, her foot slipped. Her arms flailed wildly, her smirk vanished, and with a loud splash, she plunged straight into the frog-infested water. For a moment, everything was silent. Then the screaming started. The backyard was silent again, save for the faint croaking of a few frogs that had escaped the pool and now hid in the bushes. Lisa's screams still echoed in James's ears as he stood on the porch, watching her silhouette disappear into the night, dripping wet and humiliated. The pool water rippled faintly, the frogs scattering in chaotic patterns, but James barely noticed. His mind was racing, adrenaline pumping through his veins. He had her on camera, undeniable proof of her trespassing and vandalism. This time, she wouldn't wriggle out of it. Mike's truck rumbled into the driveway just as James turned off the porch light. The headlights cut through the darkness, illuminating the yard as Mike hopped out, his phone in hand. Dude, I saw your text. What the hell happened? Did she really fall in? James grinned, a rare flicker of triumph lighting his exhausted features. Oh, she didn't just fall in. She face-planted into a pool full of frogs she dumped there herself. Screamed like she was being eaten alive. Mike doubled over, clutching his stomach as laughter erupted from him. Oh my God, that's too good. Please tell me you got it on video. Every second, James said, holding up his phone. 4K, crystal clear. Her flailing, her yelling, the whole meltdown. It's gold. Mike wiped a tear from his eye, still chuckling. You've got to send that to me. I need to see this masterpiece. James nodded, already pulling up the footage. As the video played, Lisa's smug strut, the bucket dump, the slip, the splash, Mike's laughter grew louder, bouncing off the quiet houses around them. Look at her arms, he wheezed, pointing at the screen. She's like a windmill going down. James couldn't help but laugh too, the tension of the night melting away for a moment. But as the video looped back to Lisa's furious exit, his resolve hardened. She told me to delete it, he said, pocketing the phone. Said I had no right to film her. Mike snorted. No right. She trespassed onto your property and turned your pool into a damn frog pond. You've got every right. I know, James said, crossing his arms. But she's still acting like she's untouchable. Thinks the HOA won't care, that no one will take it seriously. I'm done letting her walk all over me. Mike's grin faded into something sharper, more conspiratorial. So what's the play? You've got the evidence, now what? James paced the porch, his slippers scuffing against the wood. First, I get these frogs out. I'm calling the pool guy again tomorrow. Poor bastard's gonna think I'm running a wildlife sanctuary. Then I'm taking this to the HOA. They've ignored her crap for years, but they can't ignore video. Mike nodded, leaning against the railing. Smart. But you know she'll fight it. She's got that whole poor innocent mom act she pulls whenever someone calls her out. She can try, James said, his voice steely. But this isn't just about me anymore. She's pissed off half the neighborhood at this point. I'm betting I can rally some allies. Mike raised an eyebrow. Allies? You mean like Mrs. Henderson? James smirked. Mrs. Henderson, Edith to her friends, was a retired schoolteacher who lived 2 houses down. She'd been on the receiving end of Lisa's antics more times than anyone could count. Her rose bushes had nearly gone up in flames during Lisa's 4th of July fiasco, and her pristine front lawn had been a favorite stomping ground for Lisa's kids until Edith installed a spiked wrought iron fence. If anyone hated Lisa more than James did, it was her. "Edith's a start," James said. "She's got a sharp tongue and no patience for nonsense. Plus, she's tight with the HOA president, Mr. Thompson. If I can get her on board, this might actually stick." Mike clapped him on the back. "I like it. The old lady's a force of nature. What about the others?" James thought for a moment. "There's the Patels across the street. Lisa's dog tore up their flower beds last spring, and they're still mad about it. And maybe Carlos Ruiz down the block. Her kids broke his mailbox playing baseball with a stick, and she laughed it off." "Sounds like a coalition," Mike said, grinning. "The Anti-Lisa League. You're going to need a catchy name." James chuckled despite himself. "Let's not get ahead of ourselves. I just want her to face some consequences for once." The next morning, James was up early, fueled by coffee and determination. The pool technician arrived at 8, a wiry guy named Tony who took one look at the frog-infested water and sighed. "Eels yesterday, frogs today. What's next, alligators?" "Don't jinx me," James said, handing him a thermos of coffee as a peace offering. "Just get them out, and I'll owe you big time." Tony grumbled, but got to work, netting the frogs one by one while James sat on the patio, reviewing the footage again. Every angle was perfect. Lisa's face clear as day, the bucket unmistakable, the fall undeniably hilarious. He saved multiple copies to his cloud drive, just in case, then drafted an email to the HOA. Short, professional, attached video. Trespassing, vandalism, harassment. Please address. Next, he headed to Edith Henderson's house. Her front yard was a testament to her meticulous nature. Rose bushes in perfect rows, a bird bath sparkling in the sun, not a blade of grass out of place. She answered the door in a floral apron, her silver hair pulled into a tight bun, her sharp blue eyes narrowing as she saw him. "James Carter," she said, her voice crisp. "If this is about that Grayson woman, I already heard the screaming last night." James grinned. "Then you'll love this." He held up his phone and played the video. Edith watched in silence, her lips twitching as Lisa hit the water. When it ended, she let out a dry, raspy laugh. "Well, I'll be damned. She finally got what she deserved. You're taking this to the HOA." "Already sent it," James said. "But I need backup. She'll deny everything, and you know how spineless they can be." Edith's eyes glinted with something fierce. "Oh, I'll back you up, boy. That woman's been a thorn in my side for years. I'll call Thompson myself. Make sure he doesn't weasel out of this." By noon, James had the Patels and Carlos on board too. The Patels, a quiet couple in their 40s, nodded grimly as he showed them the footage, their anger reignited by the memory of their ruined tulips. Carlos, a burly mechanic with a quick temper, laughed so hard he nearly dropped his beer, then promised to show up at the next HOA meeting with his own list of grievances. Mike swung by that afternoon, a six-pack in hand. "How's the army shaping up?" "Better than I expected," James said, cracking open a beer. "Edith's on a warpath, and the others are fed up enough to speak out. If Lisa tries to play innocent, she's toast." Mike raised his bottle. "To justice. And to Lisa eating crow." James clinked his bottle against Mike's, but a flicker of doubt lingered. Lisa wasn't the type to go down quietly. She'd fight, she'd scheme, and she'd probably escalate. He glanced at the pool, now frog-free but still a target. This wasn't over, not by a long shot. The next few days were a blur of preparation. James checked the cameras obsessively, tweaking their positions to cover every inch of his yard. He wasn't taking any chances. Lisa had proven she was bold enough to strike twice, and he'd be damned if she caught him off guard again. The pool sparkled under the afternoon sun, a deceptive calm that belied the chaos of the past week. Tony had done his job well, but James couldn't shake the feeling that Lisa was lurking, waiting for her next shot. She didn't disappoint. It was Thursday night, 3 days after the frog incident, when the motion alert buzzed again. James was in the living room, half watching a basketball game, when his phone lit up. His pulse quickened as he grabbed it and pulled up the feed. There she was, Lisa, creeping through the shadows of his backyard, a new bucket in her hands. She moved with the same cocky stealth, oblivious to the red recording light blinking above her. James hit record and zoomed in, his jaw tightening as she reached the pool. She glanced around, then dumped the bucket's contents into the water. This time, it wasn't frogs or eels. A flurry of tiny, darting shapes rippled across the surface. Goldfish, dozens of them, their orange scales glinting under the camera's night vision. It wasn't as grotesque as eels or as chaotic as frogs, but it was still vandalism, still a violation. He didn't hesitate. Flipping on the porch light, he stepped outside, his voice cutting through the night. "Lisa, seriously? Goldfish now?" She froze, the bucket clattering to the deck. For a moment, she looked genuinely startled, but then that smirk slid back into place. "Oh, relax, James. They're just fish. Thought your pool could use some color." "Get off my property," he said, his tone flat and final. She laughed, tossing her hair. "You're so dramatic. It's not a big deal. The kids wanted a pond, and I figured." "I don't care what you figured," he interrupted, pointing at the cameras. "It's all on tape. Again, you're done." Her smirk faltered, but she recovered quickly. "Whatever. No one's going to care about a few fish. Good luck proving it's worth a fuss." She turned to leave, strutting toward the gate, but the deck was still slick from an earlier rain. Her sneaker slipped, her arms pinwheeled, and for the second time that week, Lisa Grayson went down. This time, she didn't fall into the pool. She landed hard on her backside, the bucket skidding across the wood. A yelp escaped her, followed by a string of curses as she scrambled to her feet. James folded his arms, watching her stumble away. "Careful, Lisa. Wet decks are tricky." She shot him a venomous glare over her shoulder, then disappeared into the night. James waited until she was gone before checking the pool. The goldfish darted in panicked circles, a surreal splash of color against the blue tiles. He sighed, already dreading another call to Tony, but the footage was worth it. 2 incidents, 2 humiliations, all recorded. Mike arrived 10 minutes later, summoned by a triumphant text. "Goldfish," he said, peering into the pool. "She's running out of ideas. Or she's just getting weirder," James replied, showing him the video. "Either way, I've got her dead to rights now." Mike grinned. "This is better than reality TV. What's the next move?" "HOA meetings tomorrow," James said. "I'm presenting everything. Eels, frogs, fish." Edith's rallying the troops, and Thompson's already pissed about the last complaint. Lisa's not talking her way out of this. The meeting was held in the community center, a bland beige room with folding chairs and a flickering fluorescent light. James arrived early, laptop in hand, flanked by Edith, the Patels, and Carlos. The air buzzed with tension as neighbors filed in, whispering about the rumors that had already spread. Lisa sauntered in last, her chin high, her kids trailing behind her like a chaotic entourage. Mr. Thompson, a balding man in his 60s with a perpetually tired expression, called the meeting to order. "We've got a grievance from James Carter. Let's hear it." James stood, projecting the footage onto a screen. The room fell silent as the eels writhed, the frogs splashed, and the goldfish darted. Gasps and muffled laughter rippled through the crowd as Lisa's falls played out, her screams echoing in the stillness. When it ended, James turned to the room. "Trespassing. Vandalism. Harassment. 3 times in a week. I want action." Lisa shot to her feet, her face red. "This is ridiculous. It's just a prank, harmless fun. He's blowing it out of proportion." Edith snorted, her voice cutting through the room. "Harmless? Tell that to my rose bushes you nearly torched, you little menace." The Patels chimed in, their voices tight with anger. "Our garden was ruined because of her dog," Carlos added, "and my mailbox didn't fix itself." The room erupted into murmurs, neighbors nodding and muttering their own stories. Thompson raised a hand, silencing them. "Lisa, we've had complaints about you before. This time, there's evidence. Clear evidence." "It's not a big deal," she snapped. "He's just mad because you broke the rules," Thompson said, his tone final. "You're fined $500 for each incident. That's $1,500. And if it happens again, we're talking legal action." Lisa's mouth opened, then closed, her face paling. For once, she had no comeback. She stormed out, her kids scrambling after her, as the room buzzed with satisfaction. James exhaled, the weight lifting slightly. It wasn't over, not completely, but it was a start. The victory was sweet, but James knew better than to relax. Lisa wasn't the type to slink away quietly. She'd stew, she'd plot, and she'd come back swinging. The fines were a blow to her pride more than her wallet, and pride was her currency. By Friday morning, he'd uploaded the footage to the neighborhood Facebook group, titled simply, "Caught in the Act." The response was immediate. Comments flooded in, a mix of laughter, outrage, and long-buried grievances. She let her kids trample my azaleas last year. Finally, someone stood up to her. Eel Queen strikes again, love the fall. James sipped his coffee, scrolling through the chaos with a grim smile. Public humiliation might not stop her, but it would make her think twice. Mike showed up around 10, practically bouncing with excitement. "Dude, the group's on fire. You've got a fan club now." "Good," James said, shutting his laptop. She wanted attention, she's got it. The backlash hit Lisa hard. By noon, she was pounding on his door, her face a mask of fury. James opened it, leaning casually against the frame. "What now, Lisa?" "Delete that video," she snapped, jabbing a finger at him. "You're making me look bad." "You did that yourself," he said, sipping his coffee. "You trespassed, you vandalized, you fell. I just hit record." "It's defamation," she screeched. "It's footage," he corrected. "Truth isn't defamation." She opened her mouth to argue, but a new voice cut in. "Lisa, I think you should leave." They turned to see Mr. Thompson standing at the end of the driveway, his phone in hand. "We had an emergency meeting this morning," he said, his voice cold. "The footage sealed it. You're on thin ice. Third strike means a lawsuit." Lisa's face drained of color. "You can't." "We can," Thompson said. "You've been warned before. This time it's official. Pay the fines, or we escalate." She spun back to James, her eyes blazing. "You set me up." He laughed, low and sharp. "You set yourself up. Thanks for the confession, though." With a frustrated scream, she stormed off, leaving a trail of muttered curses. Thompson nodded at James. "If she tries anything else, let me know. We're watching her now." That night, James and Mike sat by the pool, beers in hand, the water finally peaceful. "To victory," Mike said, clinking his bottle. "To shutting her up," James replied. But as the stars glittered overhead, he couldn't shake the feeling that Lisa wasn't done. Not yet. The idea hit James over breakfast the next morning. Lisa had lost the battle, but the war wasn't over. She'd humiliated him with eels, frogs, and fish. Now it was his turn. Not with vandalism, but with something better, exclusion. A grand, public statement she couldn't ignore. Mike was all in. "A pool party," he said, grinning over his coffee. "Invite the whole neighborhood, everyone but her. Rub it in her face." James nodded, the plan taking shape. Not just any party. An eel-free extravaganza. Make it loud, make it fun, make it hers to watch from the sidelines. They spent the weekend planning. Invitations went out, physical flyers in mailboxes, posts in the Facebook group, word of mouth through Edith and the others. The theme was set. No eels, no frogs, no Lisa. James ordered floaties, rented a sound system, and enlisted Carlos to man the grill. The Patels offered homemade samosas, and Edith promised her famous lemonade. By Monday, Willow Creek was buzzing with anticipation. Lisa caught wind of it by Wednesday. She cornered James in his driveway, her arms crossed. "A party? Without me? That's petty," says the woman who dumped eels in my pool. He shot back. "You're not invited. Deal with it." She huffed, stomping off, but the gleam in her eye told him she wasn't done. He doubled down on security, adding a temporary lock to the gate and briefing the neighbors to keep an eye out. Saturday would be her reckoning. The party was a triumph. By noon on Saturday, James's backyard was packed, neighbors lounging on floaties, kids splashing in the pool, music thumping through the air. A giant sign hung by the deck, guaranteed no eels, frogs, or Lisas. Laughter echoed as Carlos flipped burgers, Edith poured lemonade, and the Patels passed out samosas. It was everything Lisa wasn't. Peaceful, communal, joyful. She showed up at 2, fuming at the fence. "You can't exclude me," she shouted, her voice shrill over the music. James sipped his drink, grinning. "Private property, Lisa. My rules." The crowd caught on, a chant rising. "Eel Queen, Eel Queen. Lisa's face turned crimson, her fists clenched. She lingered for a moment, then stormed off, defeated. Mike clapped James on the back. She's gone, man. You won. For the rest of the summer, the pool stayed pristine. Lisa kept her distance, her pride too battered to try again. James had his peace, and his revenge. As summer faded, James sat by the pool, reflecting on the chaos. The cameras stayed up, a silent warning, but Lisa's house was quiet. The neighborhood had shifted, closer now, united by the shared victory. Edith dropped by with cookies, Carlos fixed his truck, and the Patels invited him for dinner. Willow Creek felt like home again. Mike joined him one evening, a beer in hand. Think she's learned her lesson? James shrugged. Maybe, but I'm ready if she hasn't. They toasted to that, the water glinting under the dusk sky. Peace, for now, was enough.